Hi everyone. Before this started, I was hoping for us to beat the record that was yesterday in the Latin America similar meeting with 200 participants. I'm sure we can get there. Right now I see 60 participants, but I'm sure we'll have more. So welcome everyone to this session on fatherhood. This is about celebrating men's. We have a new celebration. At least I don't remember having it last year, celebrating men across Americas and across the company. And I am very happy to have this session because this is a learning session for me as well. We will have in this session Chris Salem, who is an award-winning author who is going to talk about fatherhood, who is much more qualified than I am to talk on this topic. I'm very eager to hear from him, introduce him. But before that, I just want to say one thing. I was trying to understand how we can bring a metaphor in talking about fathers and in talking about men. And if you look back at history, I think for the bigger part of the last hundreds of years, thousands of years, I think men had a very privileged place in our society. It was, with a few exceptions, it was pretty much a kind of a paternalistic power structure. And that's changed. 40, 50, 100 years ago, that changed. And it's not that the role of men was questioned, but the classical roles that men had, warriors, providers for the family, caretakers, that got a little bit blurred. And it's a lot of reasons for that, but that shift, that change is very, very real. And trying to prepare for this session, I found a metaphor that I liked, which is comparing men with fire. I mean, fire can create a lot of devastation and a lot of negative impact if you are not controlling it, if you are not taking care of it. But in the same time, fire is one of the invention of fire and using fire is one of the most beneficial thing in humanity. So I kind of like that metaphor because I think it's the same with men. Unless you corral it, unless you develop it, unless you take care of it, it can have a lot of destructive potential, but in the same time, it can lead to great things. So with that, I want to pass it over to Chris. I think we are really fortunate to have him. He's a keynote speaker. He is a CEO. He's author of Fatherhood. He's the co-founder of Empowered Fathers in Action, which is an organization dedicated to strengthening the relationship between fathers and sons. So Chris, thank you for taking the time to be with us here. I'll pass it over to you. And once again, I'm going to relish and enjoy this session, celebrating men across Americas.
Well, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure. Thank you for the warm introduction. And I'm looking forward today to celebrate this day with all us men here. And, fatherhood, they always say, is the toughest job you'll ever love. And it's so true. And, in today's world, fatherhood is something that, we've been led to believe up to this point that, fathers are here to provide means to an end. We're here to protect our family and provide for our families. And while that is true, it's more than just that, especially how it relates to children, whether if it's your son, daughter, or both, and how the father role is so instrumental in a child's development. So we're really going to, talk about the importance of that. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the back end of some of the things that could interfere with that process. Things that may be our own personal experiences growing up in our own households when we were young boys and young men, and our relationships with our fathers and so forth. And talk a little bit about that and how we can learn to do certain things in a different way that can really make this experience not only enjoyable for yourself, but even more importantly for your children, so they grow up to be more self-confident, believing in themselves, and to have the ability to be, future leaders in their own homes when they when they get married, and then their communities, and of course, businesses. While I'll be sharing a lot of information from Empowered Fathers in Action from that perspective, we'll also be following the criteria that you see here today, which is coming through Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is your employee assistance program. So again, we're going to be kind of sharing that, and we'd like to make sure if there's any questions, feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to address those for you. So with that being said, we're going to be talking about the value of a father. What are some of the responsibilities of being an effective father to your children, and the rewards? Preparing for certain change, because it is change. It's definitely, when you look at when you're just a single man, or you just newly been married and now all of a sudden you got children, it's always ongoing. It's a process, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the different priorities and a shift in priorities, because when we become fathers, and depending upon when the child's a baby and they're an infant and they're a young boy, young girl, and then they grow and become teenagers, there's always going to be these changes that are going to go on, and we have to be able to adapt and shift those priorities appropriately. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about establishing a routine, and talk about the importance of it takes a village to raise a child, and it's so true. Because if the child's going to grow up to be a reliant, self-confident adult, you're going to have to rely upon certain systems and other people that can help you along the way. So we'll be talking about that as well. So just a little bit of information. Children with involved fathers do better across every measure in child well-being than their peers in father-absent homes. So, kind of take a look at that for a minute. There are, going to be children that are, that have fathers, but maybe the fathers aren't emotionally available, or maybe that they're too busy to be involved on a consistent basis with their children, and those that don't have a father in the home. So there is a big difference between those that are where the father is involved. And this is so imperative, because it's always been said that, the mother role is so important in this process. And that's true when the child is born, that child has to have that connection with his or her mother, because it plays an instrumental role in that development process. But the father role becomes even more important when that child is at the ages, let's say maybe 4 and 5, around that time frame, going up into the teen years. And this is where the fatherhood role often kind of is we perceive it in a different way. Like, we don't see it as important as the mother role. And yet the reality is it's actually in many cases even more important than the mother role during that time frame, because this is where the child is developing. Many times children look for validation from a parent, and primarily it tends to gravitate towards the father. And if fathers are not present in the homes, or they are emotionally not available, this is a time where if that child, as he or she is developing, doesn't have that connection or that sense of validation on some level, they tend to grow into, not saying it's always the case, but they're not going to be as self-confident in themselves and be assured of certain things that they're looking to do in their own lives. So they begin to seek validation from other sources. And oftentimes they may be sources that are not well suited for their development and where they're going. So this is why, this particular stat that you see here shows that when fathers are involved on a consistent basis with their children, involved in their activities, involved with their development, it plays an instrumental role in how they grow up to be self-confident adults. So a little bit more on stats, children with a father in the home. So as you can see here, that when fathers are present in the home, they're 4 times less likely to be poor, because the children provide an incentive for the man to do something, to take charge, to do something to make sure that their children are fed, that their wife is protected, and that they have a roof over their head. And it just seems like with good karma that when a father is learning, and it's never easy to balance those priorities to the best of his ability. It's never going to be perfect balance. There's no such thing, but striving for harmony. It's amazing that while it might look tough at first or very difficult, that somehow it always works out. And this is why, again, fathers that are involved with their children in the home are more or less likely to experience poverty. Also, fathers are 3 times less likely to have a certain health disorder. Again, the feeling that when you are providing for a child, not just monetarily or just for survival means, but actually involved in their personal development and being there for them, somebody that they can look to as a role model. This is also going to benefit the father because it provides them a way to kind of do certain things that maybe perhaps they didn't get when they were growing up. And again, it gives them the ability to give without expectation to their children, but even better, to receive without resistance, because they also are receiving. Doesn't necessarily mean from their children for what they give, but they're receiving in other ways. And this is where this obviously could help from a health perspective. And when we look at health, it's not just physical health, but this is also emotional health, financial well-being, and so forth. In terms of other stats, if you look at abuse, again, half are likely to suffer from abuse or neglect. Again, 40% are less likely to smoke, drink, or use drugs, and so on. So again, you can see the stats here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see here, it reduces the likelihood of all these particular issues when children have a father that's involved. And again, I just wanted to point out again, just because the father is in the home, if the father is not involved emotionally and be inconsistent, doesn't matter if he's present or not, that can also have a negative effect as well. So I just wanted to point that out. It's so important. And we're going to get into some of the things that can show you as dads or those that are going to look to become a dad, that again, what some of the things that you can do to be prepared for that, or if you are in the process of enjoying the fatherhood role, and some things that you can modify or change to make that process even better.
And Chris, I'm interrupting you for a second. We have one question on our chat. Sure. Asking you to give some more color around what does it mean to be emotionally available?
So emotionally available means that we are we're not trying to do multiple things at the same time, that we're not checking email or checking social media, that we're busy thinking about something else in the workplace, with our work, we're checked out. It's really being connected with your child, because a lot of times as adults, we don't really think that children are as smart as we think that, and they are. They pick up on this. They know that if you are engaged 100% or not. So it's so important because children, when they grow up, they learn from what they observe, not from what they've been told or what they hear. It's what they observe. So when children get a feeling that you are connected, you are involved, you have their undivided attention in that moment, these are the critical times that are imperative for a child's development. And then also, it helps you as the father to learn how to be in the moment, knowing that if there are other important things going on in your life, which there are going to be, you have your business, you have your career, you have certain other duties that you have as a husband or outside of the father role, that when you are dedicating time to just those areas, that you can then again be focused 100% at that time in those areas, and again learning how to be focused. So that's where being emotionally available is so important. And then also recognizing that if we didn't have this growing up with our own dads, okay, this could lead to limited beliefs about ourselves. This could affect our own level of self-esteem and self-confidence, maybe growing up. And as we become adults, could play out in different ways with how we look at ourselves, how others may perceive us, how it affects our behavior and our communication. Because again, we can only give what we know and what we have. We can't give what we don't have. So it's important that when we're emotionally available, that we could also recognize that there might be certain shortcomings. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just recognizing if there are things that are interfering with your connection and communication and development with your child, that we can begin to look within to see where the root cause is to our own limited beliefs that may be impacting that process with your children. And again, it is a process. And just to let you know that this affects just about everybody in the world. So you're not alone. And it's not that, if there are certain things that have happened where there's been a disconnect, it's not that you did anything with ill intent. It's just that again, it could be certain things from our own childhood that are playing out subconsciously that could be slightly interfering with that process. So again, being emotionally available will help us dads to really be in tune with that, to see if things are flowing or not flowing in the right way. Hopefully that addresses the question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will continue on. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to inquire here. Again, this is where we all learn. So let's take a look at the process. So obviously there's going to always be a responsibility with every aspect of our manhood as we grow from a boy into brotherhood to manhood to getting married and then becoming a father. So there's always going to be rewards and there's always risks associated with that as well. So it's important to know that when you're looking at this process is to really recognize that the desired results that we seek in our personal lives as dads, and how when we do become dads and that we aspire to be great dads, that's obviously our outcomes that we seek. Doesn't necessarily always mean that's going to happen because life can get in the way. Certain issues from our own past can come in subconsciously to interfere. So this is where it's important to embrace a process, because when we commit and embrace a process here, it allows us to know that we don't have to be focused on the result itself, that the results that we seek are a byproduct of what we put into the process. And it's in the process that allows us or kind of moves us to be present at that time. So when we are young boys, we are enjoying our boyhood, the experiences of being a boy. And then as we grow older, into our teen years, again, how we treat our siblings, our friends, our parents, again, following that process. Then we become men. And at that point, the same thing. How are we carrying ourselves? How do we look at ourselves? How do we treat others that are important in our lives as men? And looking at how that process is evolving. So when we are emotionally in tune with who we are during that process, we can begin to recognize what is working and what is not. Now, that a lot of times that might be confusing to a young boy or even a teenager. But as we've approached, manhood, these are the times that we can begin to reflect where things are working or not working. And when things are not working, to begin to understand where the root cause to those issues come from. So, and then again, as you get married or you develop a relationship with your spouse, again, how you go into that particular relationship and how you treat your wife. And then, of course, the same thing when you get into fatherhood. So let me just discuss a process of mind. So this might help paint a picture of how certain things could get off track, but then how you can then get back on track and rebound. So when I was a young boy, I grew up in a dysfunctional family. I had two parents that, my mother was wonderful. She was a school teacher. But my father was emotionally not available. He was, when he was there, he was really there. And he often traveled a lot. So I didn't really get to see my father that often. So when I would go to ball games and I would, be involved in certain things that were important as part of my process, growing up as a boy into brotherhood, I didn't have that role model. I didn't have that father that I could look up to that could guide me through this process, through brotherhood, manhood, and so on. My mother did the best she could, But as I grew up into becoming a teenager, I began to become very angry. I grew up into a very angry young man, and I just thought it was all part of puberty and becoming a man, and I thought that's what the process was. I didn't know any better, but I didn't realize that my anger was a direct reflection of not having this connection with my father. I had a level of low self-esteem, even though I projected this bravado that it was otherwise, different. That I had high self-esteem and had a lot of confidence, but in reality, it was not the case. And obviously, as I approached my when I became a man, this affected a lot of my behavior and my relationships with other people. And it started with me because I didn't have that foundation. I didn't have anything to really model against. And because growing up in a dysfunctional family and not having my father emotionally available, I just didn't know what to do. So as a result of this led to a lot of hardships in my life, failed relationships, and certain things that I got involved in that were not healthy to my well-being nor other people. So in order to undo this, I had to hit rock bottom, and it was unfortunately my father's coming down with cancer at the age of 56 that triggered me to take responsibility for where I was and to find out what was the root cause to my anger and what was affecting my behavior, my communication with others, and not allowing me to forge positive relationships. And and I began to find out through this process that I will talk about how I was able to recognize for the first time that my father didn't was not available in my life because he intended it to be that way. It was because my father didn't know how to be the father that I wanted him to be. Because the same thing happened to him growing up with his dad, my grandfather. See, we can only give or do what we know. And that's all my father knew was to check out because my grandfather did the same thing to him. So he didn't know how to be that role model, that father. Yet I learned that it wasn't coming from ill intent. It was again that he just didn't know how, and I had to accept that. I had to take responsibility to know that if I was going to break this pattern, that I didn't repeat this with my own future son or daughter one day, that I had to take responsibility for what was holding me back in order to now be in a place where I could be a father that played an instrumental part in the development of my child's well-being. So it was a long journey, but I was able to do it. And I used a process of meditation and journaling to get to the root cause of my own limited beliefs because of this disconnect with my father. And from the same place with the meditation and journaling, I was able to develop a clear foundation to develop new habits and disciplines and beliefs about myself that allowed me to grow into the man I am today that comes from a strong family value with strong family values, believing that you have to serve yourself in a positive way so that you can be able to be the example and give to others, in this case your family, your wife, your children, other people that are important to you. So I like to use that story so it can really stress the importance of the process of when you are a young man or young boy as you grow into not only a man, but also a father. And those that might be struggling in this particular role that recognize that you're not alone, that you can reverse it, but it takes a little time. But knowing that if you're able to do that, not only for yourself, the rewards that it will provide to your children going forward as they become adults to also nurture their children in a positive and healthy way.
Thank you, Chris. I think this is an extremely powerful message. It's talking about your experience, but in the same time, it's talking about vulnerability that we all feel at times, and we already have reactions from the listeners.
Absolutely.
So opening up. I do want to take a moment to introduce Sylvia because Sylvia is actually the person that believes very in a very powerful way in celebrating all our employees and especially men today. So she joined us. So Sylvia, we have the team here if you want to address them.
Yeah, guys, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining.
I'm sorry, guys. I was on another celebration with the team, but rushing really to join you guys today for this all important conversation. Chris, thank you for sharing from your personal experience. That's always valuable, much more than any book and any newspaper can share. So I appreciate that you're doing that with the team here today. And my all dear colleagues, I value all diversity that we have in the team, right? And I think we need a great balance. We need your strong power in the team. We need what you we need the confidence, very often I need your personal help to kind of infuse this to some of your female colleagues, right, who sometimes hesitate in their decision and stay back. You play an important part in balancing the team, and it's both. That's super important for me. And I'm so glad I have you all in the team. I wish you a fantastic Monday. I really thought about it, and we always do Women's Day, and there's a lot of buzz around it. And then I spoke to Jimmy and some other colleagues, Israel, and said, guys, everything matters. My men leaders are also here. My men employees are also here. They want recognition. So I'm here to express my gratitude for you guys, and for what you bring on to the table. As you learn through becoming better role models and through managing yourself, as Christopher was explaining, I really value you in my team. And thank you guys for actually doing it. It was I've been listening to what Chris was saying for a while. And look, if I look back to my to my husband, if I look back to my father, if I look back to my brother, to my nephews, I just love them passionately, right, for what they bring on the table. So enjoy the day, guys, and that's really it.
Thank you so much. So, you want me to get back? I can follow right back up where we are. If any of you gentlemen that are in this process right now, wherever you are, and maybe you're stuck, maybe there's some fears about becoming a father because of your experience, or maybe you're experiencing some struggles in fatherhood, or maybe you're in a great place, which is even better, obviously. But if you are, struggling in some area, again, knowing that there is a process to get out of the problem into the solution. And it all comes down to awareness, acceptance, and forgiveness. Because you can't address the problem and create a solution if you're not aware of what the problem is in the first place. And we have to be able to accept where we are to commit to a process to get out of the problem into the solution. And forgiveness is going to be the channel to release the problem and to forge the solution, or to create the solution, I should say. And forgiveness is very powerful. And it's not forgiveness to the source. In my case, it was my father, forgiving my father on his deathbed, because again, he could only be who he was. He couldn't be what I desired him to be for myself and my brother, or what my mother had anticipated from him. So again, that we have to be responsible for our own lives, no matter what cards have been dealt to us when we were young. We can't point the finger at anyone. We just have to be aware, accept, and make a commitment to make the process more efficient, more positive, and learning how we can undo the things that are holding us back through forgiveness, and more importantly, forgiving ourselves to move forward. So another quote here, which is Dan Castellaneta, who is the voice of Homer Simpson, as everyone probably knows that show, The Simpsons. "I won't lie to you, fatherhood. It isn't easy like motherhood." Well, I wouldn't say that motherhood's easy either. I think that they're both roles that serve a very high purpose for the development of children. Mothers are always going to be mothers, just like fathers always have to be fathers. And I think that sometimes as dads, we begin to kind of think that, well, there might be a certain period of time that we play that role, and then as children get older, then we don't have to really play that role. Well, no, I believe it's a lifelong thing. Once a dad, always a dad, just like a mom. And mothers really, and women understand that. So again, it's learning to be that the best thing that we can do as dads, as we look at that role, no matter if we're active at being fathers to our children, or whether if your children are adults now and they're parents of, to their own children, that the best thing that we can do for our children as dads is to be the example. We're not here to do for our children. We're not here to please and enable them. That leads to codependent behavior. We are here to, be the example of certain values and principles that are positive and productive, that will serve them if they choose to adopt them in their own way, that they can do the same for themselves and pass that along to their children, and from generation to generation and so forth. So again, to be that example, we have to kind of go through that process that we talked about, and making sure that we're not being held back by certain limited beliefs, that we could address them at the root cause and learn to move forward in the solution to be that example going forward for our children, which is lifelong. So let's take a look at a day in the life before fatherhood. So this is kind of just a little exercise that, I'm just going to kind of paint the picture right now. You can kind of do it at your leisure. Again, these slides will be provided to you as well. But again, think about what your life consisted of, before you were a dad. So you have a timetable here. What did that look like? What did you do? How did you live your life? Was it productive? Was it self-serving in a positive way, not a narcissistic way, but in a positive way that would be an example for others to do for themselves? Again, being that example, coming from empathy and kindness, projecting those core values and principles that others can find within themselves to improve the qualities of their life. What did that look like before fatherhood? So you want to kind of put that down, because we're going to come back to this and then look at it now that you are in fatherhood. And are there going to be adjustments? Yeah, of course. You're going to have to make some changes. Is there going to be perfect balance or balance in itself? No, there's no such thing as perfect balance, but we can strive for harmony. Is another word, thinking about, like a seesaw. A seesaw will never be balanced perfectly on its axis point. It's always teetering. So there's always going to be a give or take. Sometimes that you have to sacrifice in a certain area to really make strides in other areas. But yet we're keeping it in check where it's not one extreme to the other. So it's important that if we can write this down, this could really help you to take it out of your head, so that you can kind of look at it from a third party perspective and be able to see, what you did and then what you are doing now as a dad. Now, if some of you are not dads yet, it's fine. You could still do this exercise. And then when that time comes, that you can do the same thing as a father and begin to kind of look at where the transitions are and how that you can continue to move forward in a positive way to strive for that harmony. Okay, and my thing is stuck here a little bit, so let's see here. Sometimes, here we go. It just clicked. Sorry about that. So let's take a look at preparing for change. So sacrifice and compromise. So for instance, we all come from different backgrounds. Perhaps our moms were raised one way, our dads were raised in another, but somehow we're able to come together. See, what happens with as a father, when we play a role in here, there are going to be sometimes certain sacrifices or compromises, but we're not compromising who we are in itself. We're just knowing that where can we find common ground where it works for the family. Okay. And again, it doesn't mean whoever takes credit. If the mother comes up with the idea that makes most sense, then great. If it's the dad, great. It's not about who takes credit. It's really finding something that in some way that everybody in the family can relate to. And again, just understanding that there is going to be compromise, that when we are preparing for change, no matter if you just got married or you're having a child for the first time, or maybe you're having some more children, again, recognizing that it's always going to be that give and take. And what's important here is as dads, that we have to be able to communicate effectively with our spouses, and our children. And communication is, a lot of times, this is a vague area. Sometimes, as human beings in general, we communicate based upon assumption and speculation. We just assume that somebody knows what we want or what we said. Somebody could even be doing this and acknowledging you, which you would say, oh, they understand what I'm looking for, what I've asked. But just because somebody acknowledges you with nodding their head doesn't mean that they understood you. So the key here in any relationship, and this is so important where it starts with the spouse, then the child, as fathers, that we have to really learn that we cannot assume and speculate with our wives, with our girlfriends, and of course, then our children. It's that we don't communicate passively or aggressively, that we are assertive, we are very specific. We can paraphrase, so we can make sure that we are learning to relate and listen to understand the other person before we respond. So I'll say that again, that we relate and listen to understand versus respond. Because as humans, many times we are conditioned while we're listening to someone, we are listening, but we're listening to respond only. We're just waiting for that person to stop. But even though we hear them, we're not really understanding them like we think we are. And that's where there's a disconnect a lot of times. And many times that could be happening right how you were raised. Maybe your father might have heard you, but he really didn't understand you. Same thing could be said for the mother. So these are things that, again, can lead to issues later on that lead to limited beliefs and certain things that affect your level of self-confidence. So this is why communication plays an important role, especially in the change process, that we can learn how to change, or excuse me, communicate effectively doing that. So some other things that we should look at with change here is the changing role of parents and fathers. In today's world, it's not that just the dad is the only person that works and the mother stays at home. Nowadays, it's very common that two parents are working because things are more expensive. There's a lot of uncertainty in the job market nowadays. So, it's imperative that people, are working together to make sure that they can not only provide for their children, but that they have some type of security and they can plan ahead financially to make sure that they're able to do the things that they want to do and enjoy as a family. And then, of course, when the parents retire. So on average, fathers are working 8% less per week and spending more time assuming more home duties, housework duties, and they're spending a little bit more time with the child care responsibilities. So again, this is where communication plays such an important role, and why we have to be able to communicate effectively. And again, here are some other stats that you can look up that will support that. So another thing here, due to increases in time spent on household and childcare, fathers now have less time. So, again, we live in a world where there's a lot of information and there's a lot getting thrown at us. We can be easily distracted in today's world. So this is why it's so important as fathers that we begin to kind of embrace the process that we talked about, learning how to be present and having a plan or a strategy so we can spend our time wisely. So this way that when we are dedicated to spending time with our children, that they have our undivided attention, that when we are doing certain duties around the home, that we can then focus just on that and not anything else. And that when we are working, that we can, if we're laser focused, that we can be, quite surprising that we can get a lot more done in a less period of time and still remain productive and still produce quality work. So again, it comes down to how focused are you and do you have a plan? Because the people that have a plan and a strategy for each day where they have their goals and the priorities that matter written down and that follow that agenda are more likely to find harmony in their lives versus those that don't have a plan or kind of shooting at the hip or many times trying to multitask and try to do multiple things at once. That often leads to feeling overwhelmed. It leads to living your life in the past and the future, and that creates a level of anxiety, and then anxiety can lead to other things like procrastination. So it's so important that while this is definitely a fact in today's world and fathers having less time, that we can regain that time back and use it more effectively in those shorter periods of time by being focused and having a plan. So establishing a routine. So depending upon your situation, you might be happily married and you are sharing that responsibility with your wife. You may not be married, you might be divorced, but have shared custody, or you may be just a single parent. It's not just single moms out there. There are some cases where there are single dads for whatever reason. Maybe the spouse unfortunately passed away. These things happen. So whatever your role is here, it's establishing a routine. Because when you can get into a routine and develop habits and disciplines that serve you, again, not in a selfish way, but in a way that serve you, because that when they serve you, you have more to give being the example. Because remember, children learn from what they observe, not what has been done for them or told to them and so forth. It's what they observe. It's empowering them to see this through your example, and then how can they relate that to their own development, their own strengths, and what their purpose is as they move into adulthood, that they could adopt in a way that can serve them. And when they can do that, then they can repeat that process, being the example for their own children. So again, this is why establishing a routine and being consistent with it is so important, because it allows us now to be able to be that example on a consistent basis and not be checked out and not be feeling overwhelmed, that we can just be focused by having that routine in place and not allowing life to get in the way. I mean, unless there's a life changing event, those things happen. And those are things that have to be accounted for, obviously. So in terms of balancing priorities, so again, it's important that, again, this is where, again, you're looking for harmony. There's no perfect balance, but this is where communication plays such an important role. That everybody, the father's going to have a role, the mother's going to have a role. Sometimes we have to alternate those roles, right? The father could assume certain motherly duties and mother can assume some fatherly duties. But again, the father is never replacing the mother. The mother can never replace or be the father. So that we have to own those roles, and knowing that we have to share them every now and then to make sure that through the proper communication and active listening, that we are addressing these areas that will allow the family, in this case the parents, to be better examples for their children. All right, so we remember this slide from before. So when we look at a day in the life after fatherhood, so this would be for those that are already dads, and or maybe they're another child is on its way, a girl or a boy or both, whatever the case may be. So again, it's like, how has this changed? And what are some of the things that you can do that maybe if you don't have a certain harmony in your life, you're not as focused. There could be certain issues that are affecting your behavior that are not conducive to the development of your relationship with your wife or your children. These are things that can help you to kind of pinpoint what are some things that you can do to change that situation, embracing that process that we talked about. Now, getting back to, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, again, think about, in your business, your company, right? It's not just one person that can make everything happen. It takes people. It takes everybody to, taking responsibility and accountability for their roles and being responsible for that. That when they come together as a business unit, interdependently versus codependent, that they're able to achieve bigger and better things. See, as dads, we can only do the best we can. We're only one person. So there are going to be cases where we have to use systems to better nurture our children. Again, our children, also having role models with certain teachers, coaches, maybe a neighbor, an uncle, an aunt, these types of things, a grandparent. Maybe there's a mentor at the church or on the sports team that they play in, or a community center. Whatever the case may be, that these all play an important role as well in the development of the child. But again, it doesn't replace the father role, because the father role, just think about it as kind of like the central point there with the child, and there you see the child in the middle. But knowing that there are going to be cases that you can't always be in every day around your child 24/7, that again, that the child is getting positive reinforcement, or that these other people are also being a good example for their development as well. But it really pays off to know what's going on in your child's life. Who are these other people and what role do they play? So again, it's not your job to manage the process with these people, but to know what's going on and to encourage your child to take advantage of these other people as part of the system here, or in this case, they call it a village. So in terms of the National Fatherhood Initiative, again, these are stats from the father absent crisis in America. Again, 1 out of every 3 children come from father absent homes. 9 in 10 American parents agree this is a crisis. There's a book out called The Boy Crisis. It's been out for quite some time now, and it's definitely a book that I highly recommend that as men and even women, get this book. You can buy it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And it was written by Dr. Warren Farrell, and it is a book that really outlines a lot of the social problems and issues that we face as not only a nation here in North America and South America, but all over the world. This is an issue, and why prisons are overloaded with prisoners, why suicide rates are high. Here in North America, the issues with violence in schools. A lot of these things can be traced back to father absent homes or fathers that are emotionally checked out. So this is why this is such an important issue that has to be addressed, because again, it's not though that family's just their responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. Again, it goes back to it takes a village to raise a child. We all have to be responsible, no matter if it's our child or not, that we all play an important role in being the example, coming from core values and principles that empower rather than disempower our children. So, this is something that community centers, businesses, schools, sports activities, whatever the case may be, that we all can come together in some way to find common ground to be a better example for our children, and to know that this is a critical time in their life because they only get one shot at this, and that if it can be done in a way where they can grow up in a way that they have a higher level of self-confidence and self-esteem, they have the ability to become a better father, a better leader in their community, a better leader in their business or a company that they work for. This is what's going to be the difference between people growing up in codependent environments versus interdependent environments, where interdependency leads to more positive outcomes versus negative outcomes. And again, so it's all of our responsibility that we have to be the example. We have to be transparent leaders in our own right. It's not a title, it's an action that we all have to step up and really address the situation. So there are other resources available here other than what you've heard from myself today and from some of the other stats that you've seen on the screen. Again, some good resources are fatherhood.gov, which I highly encourage you to check out. There's a wealth of information there as well. And what's even more so is that you can take some of these resources and actually apply them. Again, knowledge is great, but if we're not applying it or using it in a way to make these changes over time, embracing the process, then nothing happens, right? It's just resources. So it's encouraged to check it out and begin to see how this aligns with your current situation, and see how you could apply it in a way that can help you. Because not only does it help you, but it's helping everyone else that you're empowering around you. Other dads, your children, your wife, and other people important in your life. The parents as teachers.org as well is another a good source that you could tap into. and of course, checking out the National Fatherhood Initiative.
So Chris,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really wanted to ask you if you will have time for a few questions, because
Sure, absolutely. For some reason, I'm not seeing the question, so I'll rely upon you, and I'll be happy to address those.
So do you want to take some questions now, or do you want to finish the slide that you are?
Well, yeah, I can finish with this slide. This slide is just simply, again, for those that are listening, that that this today is being brought to you by your Employee Assistance Program, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. Again, anthemeap.com. You can use GenPack to log in. A lot of things that we're talking about today, you can find resources about this also here as well, in addition to other things with face-to-face counseling sessions, legal financial consultations, child elder care consultations, ID, theft recovery, financial stuff, whatever the case may be. All of this is confidential and part of your benefits program, and it is free to you, and not only to yourself, but your spouse and your immediate family. So again, highly suggest that you check that out, and also a wealth of information there for you. And again, it's free. So with that being said, I'd be happy to address any questions for anybody here.
So first of all, I wanted to say that I received either offline or we received here on the chat lots of very positive feedback. So people really enjoyed a lot of questions around our ability to share the content. You mentioned that already, but I want to reconfirm the fact that this session has been recorded, and also they will receive the slides as well. Lots of people talked about the fact that this session responded to questions that they were having as fathers, and they would like to go once again through the content. We do have one specific question from someone that asked the question at the beginning of this session, saying, for someone that didn't grow up with his father, what will be the advices that you will give in order to be a great father themselves?
Well, I would say, and this is something that's common, that there are a lot of young boys that grow up without fathers, and hopefully they have had great moms, and those moms do their best to assume both roles. But again, a mother can only do so much. But I highly respect those women that have raised their boys and daughters by themselves. But in terms of those situations, what I would suggest is, again, just knowing that whatever was dealt to you in that case, it's not your fault, right? It is what it is, but it is our responsibility to know that if you're not in a place that is serving you, or knowing that you could be in a place that could be better, is just to take ownership of that, and to really find out what are some of the things that could be holding you back. And knowing that there are other men out there that grew up without fathers, and that perhaps that you can develop, some relationships with other men, that you could feel comfortable in being vulnerable and talking about these certain things. Not to say that they're going to become your father, but yet you can find somebody that can understand you, because that's, as children, we want to be heard. We want to be related to, just like any human being. And so even when we're adults, we can find support groups with other men, maybe perhaps that you could feel comfortable talking to. But more importantly, again, taking responsibility to, find out if because of growing up without a father, if this led to certain things that are not serving you, to address that and to forgive the source. So whether if that father might still be alive but wasn't present in your life, maybe he's passed on, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can still forgive that source and begin to kind of forgive yourself to move forward. And is it an easy thing to do? No. But until we can fully let go and release that, and knowing that we have the power from within to let it go and adopt new habits and disciplines and ways that we look at ourselves, so that we can now change that, what happened to us, and then do it in a different way for our children.
Thank you. So we have only a couple of minutes left. I wanted to thank you for a really engaging and powerful session, and wanted to thank Sylvia for joining, and pass it over to her for any closing comments from her side.
Okay, so I know the more I listen, the more I truly believe we should find moments and times in our busy business lives.
Absolutely. It's something that, again, you got to find harmony in one's life. You
My
can't, yeah.
mother, and it's super, universal for leaders as well. So that's great. And we will find a way, guys, to leverage our relationship with Anthem and provide more sessions on that topic. Guys, we are doing this for the first time. Yesterday, we had a session with the Spanish team in Spanish. We had nearly 200 colleagues joining. Today, we have a huge crowd of also about 100 people joining us for this conversation, Chris. So it's big need that's out there. And with the great feedback, I'm going to continue to sponsor this diversity events and this conversation. So thank you everyone for joining. Once again, happy Men's Day to everyone. I hope, guys, you enjoyed. We send you a little card from me and Brinda Murthy. I hope you guys received them to your home addresses. It was just a small gesture of appreciation, and many of you send me back very nice notes. So really, that's super nice and super rewarding. So I appreciate you once again, and then we'll be back with similar sessions and events. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank the attendees for being here. I'm very grateful for you being here, and I'm just the messenger. And thank you so much. And I'm happy to answer any questions offline. If you guys want to send me anything to me, I'd be happy to answer for them.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you.